relations, social relations among the Palestinian people. And all of a sudden, in a catastrophic way, made these rich Palestinian families turn them into poor ghosts outside the borders of geography and time. And the enemy is practicing and they started practicing life within the inhabitants of the tent. The tent is the skull of death. The Palestinian people have lived before that in cities and villages that were rich with their natural resources. What testifies to that is the rich old history and the ownership of geography. And it also reveals the natural transformations and the tendencies of life of its people before the occupation and the forced transformations in post-occupation which was followed by the theft of land and resources. Also here, I would like to point out to Hebron city, quoting the Israeli writer Gideon Levy, who took along with him to Hebron the journalist Lon Leon from South Africa. He was saying, we thought of visiting Hebron for the first instance, thinking of racial discrimination, because in the occupied territories there is no better place than Hebron to give an image of the Israeli, on the peak of Israeli discrimination with local content, where there is a very small minority of less than 400 settlers controlling a majority of more than 140,000 Palestinians. The quotation here from Jerusalem, from Al-Quds newspaper, 2001. Finally, the occupation of Palestine was a vicious one. It was not just a violation against geography, but rather it was an aggression against the freedom of a nation and its human happiness. Thank you.
And now this is the speech of the PSI.
I'm really honored to welcome you at the 10th annual conference for the Institute for Palestine Study under the title The Palestinian City Issues in Urban Transformation. The Institute, since the beginning of the century, has been regularly holding its annual conferences discussing urgent issues from a critical, memorizing perspective, bringing together the strategic, political dimension and research dimension. And recently, we held 10 conferences. One of the most important was the real and future of sea area and Jordan Valley area. It was held twice, in the year 2012 and 2017, and 20 years after Oslo, after the 25 years after the declaration of independence, 2018, the geostrategic status of Gaza Strip in 2014, the role of Palestinians in 1948 and their position in the Palestinian National Project, which was held in the Nazareth in the year 2015, and the Palestinian culture, the way forward in 2016. We tried to bring together the gist of these interventions in an annual book that brings together a rich academic interventions about the Palestinian general situation. This year, however, we selected to discuss the historical and future status for the Palestinian city, which is not just an ethnographic representation for the Palestinian reality, each separately as much as it targets tackling the issues of the urban crisis and its relation with the planning and demography immigration and confusion in the urban planning, a matter that has destroyed its surrounding and agricultural environment. It also tackles the issue of the urban crisis of the city. We are honored this year to host a number of researchers who came from across Palestine cities and from the world, including Spain, Canada, France, Italy, and Canada. In the inauguration, we will be glad to host, and you will be happy, the Mr. Khalid Ziada, the Lebanese historian from Tripoli, and he is the author of Friday and Sunday, and other also writings, and also will be glad to host the architect from Lebanon and the researcher from Beirut, Jad Thabit, in an important study about Hebron city and its features. A small reading, a fast reading about the coming 3 days will give you an idea about the effort exerted by our colleague Rana Al-Anani and Mr. Ala Jaradat in bringing together and revising the papers of this conference in its 8 paradigms, which is the history of the post-Nakba city and the social history for the Palestinian city and the urban transformations for Jerusalem and the spaces of the city and planning and resistance in the city and the civilization and architecture of the Palestinian city and the cultural scene of 3 Palestinian cities, and finally the cinema and music in the city. And as we are used to, we are glad to hold these sessions at Birzeit University, our historical partner in this conference, which joined us as administration and students throughout our research mission. I thank you, and thank you for your presence today, hoping that you will enjoy the interventions and presentations through these coming 3 days. Thank you.
And now, the speech of Heinrich Böll, we will listen to Dr. Ina Marx.
Ladies and gentlemen,
سيداتي وسادتي أعزائي المشاركين في هذا المؤتمر، أنا سأتحدث باللغة الإنجليزية. فكرت أنني سأتمكن من التحدث باللغة العربية عندما جئت هنا قبل 4 سنوات، لكن لسوء الحظ مع أنني
and learn it. It's too difficult. So please bear with me. It is an honor for me to welcome you to this conference on the Palestinian city issues of urban transformation. On behalf of the Heinrich Böll Foundation, I want to greet you and to wish you a very successful 3 days of speeches, panel discussions, and exchange. The Heinrich Böll Foundation is named after the German writer and winner of the Nobel Prize for Literature, Heinrich Böll. It is linked to the German party Alliance 90, the Greens, which sprang out of the anti-nuclear and environmental movement in West Germany in the 80s, and later merged with the democratic movement of East Germany. Our office here in Ramallah was opened in 1999, and in fact, we just celebrated our 20 years anniversary here in Ramallah. We operate in Palestine and in Jordan, and our fields of expertise, of interest, and what we concentrate on are environmental justice, democracy and human rights, and policy analysis. For a long time now, we have been and hope to be in the future partner of the Institute of Palestine Studies, and we are proud to support the annual conference. The title and topic of this year's conference coincides with the regional summer school that HBS has organized in Amman last August. Participants of 9 countries of the MENA region, architects, students, urban planners, and activists came together to study and discuss sustainable urban planning, disaster preparedness, transportation systems, shared space, culture, and urban agroecology. The IPS conference, of course, has a different focus and looks at the development of the Palestinian city within the historical and political context of expulsion, ethnic cleansing, occupation, and resistance. And I'm looking forward to hear the lectures and talks ahead of us. Living in Ramallah, a Palestinian city that is maybe one of the most strident examples of occupation-related development, rapid growth, density, overcrowding, encirclement, lack of hinterland, insufficient infrastructure, and bad planning, I experienced the problems Palestinians are facing in developing their urban space in the occupied territory, but no less so in the 48 areas. But I also bear witness to the steadfastness, the courage, and the amazing creativity Palestinians show in the face of an overwhelming, depressing, and oppressing reality. And this includes this formidable conference. Sincere appreciation and thanks to the Institute for Palestine Studies to organize these 3 days. I wish you all, and I wish us all, a very successful conference. Thank you very much.
And we start, she needs to use the mic. Let her turn on the mic, please.
الصوت لا مش عندي نبدأ الجلسة الافتتاحية للمؤتمر بمحاضرة افتتاحية مسجلة من بيروت للدكتور خالد زيادة. نعتذر عن عدم وجوده بيننا، ولكن نوجه تحية للبنان وأهل لبنان في هذه اللحظة الفارقة. دكتور خالد زيادة هو مؤرخ وأديب لبناني.
He's one of the prominent historians in the Arab world. He has lots of publications related to architecture and urban planning. His speech is titled by the impact of urban modernization in the Arab.
السيدات والسادة صباح الخير. أود في بداية كلامي أن أوجه الشكر إلى مؤسسة دراسة
the Institute for Palestine Studies and to Birzeit University for inviting me to be part of this in this keynote speech. I would like also to congratulate you for your efforts in addressing the Palestinian city that has struggled in order to keep and maintain its Arab identity. The topic of today is about the Arab city in general, and I would like in this point to address some points that are methodological, historical, and theoretical related to the study of a city. No doubt that everybody who studied the city or a certain city would start in looking for the history of a city as because researchers believe, and they're not mistaken, that the history of a city reflects something of its identity and its present and its personality. However, the topic that I would like to address in this regard is what was talked about the Islamic city, the Oriental studies in this regard. I would like here to say that the terminology of Islamic city has long gone, and researchers nowadays prefer to use the city in the Arab, in the Islamic world, because the Islamic, the term of Islamic city would the term of Islamic city would impose or insinuate the pattern of an identity that is one lateral, that is criticized by many. And what's most important is that we are now in front of the Arab city. Researchers in this topic, in the city context, are using the Arab city, and I refer here to a number of French researchers in this regard and others who have concluded that the term of city in the Arab world is a more accurate term and that it's more variant, whether regional or cultural or urban, that have these cities have gone through from Asia to Morocco within different cultural concepts. This is on the historical part, but also there's something new that has started a few decades ago related to the history of cities. It's related to the discovery of the documents. Documents in general, have they been diplomatic, personal? But here I would like to refer that the Ottoman documents and the Sharia court documents, where a big amount of them have been gathered and collected in Palestine due to the efforts of many researchers, and they are now available in the Levant in general, and these documents serve many studies about the cities concerning economic, social, and other aspects related to cities. These documents provide the space to study the social study aspect of the city. And here I would like to refer to Mr. Abdul Karim Rafiq in Syria and Henri Rimond, who studied the artisans and commerce in the 18th century, and others who have research in this aspect. It's the social, the historical documents through the documents of the Sharia courts. Also, from the methodological point of view, I would like here to refer to the studies, the anthropological studies, and this is a field that is still new somehow. And it has not been addressed by researchers at length. But in your conference and before the conference, the researchers, they should be more advanced in this context to study aspects that haven't been addressed by other researchers in the world of city. And one of them, like anthropology, there are many of potentials to study the relationships between the different groups that live in the city, in the urban areas, and study the religious and non-religious habits. There are many aspects that could be addressed by researchers in this regard. The main topic that I would like to address after this brief idea about the methodologies is the modernization and the city. As we all know, a city, the Arab city and the Mediterranean city have been subject to the influence of the European urbanization lately. And I wouldn't want to go deep into history, but I would like here to refer that the start of this influence has started with the start of the 18th century in Turkey. In the Ottoman Turkey with Sultan Ahmad III, who has sent an ambassador to Paris to overlook the European modernization, and then got back carrying documents and plans that some of the ruling society has implemented. However, this urban modernization, if I can call it this way, was in the context of modernization, the military modernization, administrative modernization that was somehow slow in the 18th century and has escalated in the past century with Sultan Salim III and with other sultans during the 19th century, Sultan Mahmud II and others. The important era in the modernization is the era of the organizations in Turkey, which started in 1893, as it's known to all historians, and it continued later on until the end of 19th century and era of Sultan Abdul Hamid. The characteristics of this era is that the rulers the local rulers, if we can call them this way, the sultans in Istanbul and Mr. Muhammad Ali Pasha in Egypt and his grandson Khedive Ismail, they were the ones who led this modernization. And this era has some characteristics where there was a focus on building palaces, mansions, opening new roads, and these are still seen in Cairo and Istanbul, in addition to establishing the schools and military housing units. All this have led to the existence of a new urban space, and the city was split into old section and new section. The new section is referred to as the open space that we find similar to it in all cities, which included the sarai or the palace, the central governmental unit, the post office, and later on banks and other than that of the modern facilities. Actually, the city in this time started taking a new shape and a new timing. It's a time frame that follows the system. This system has become stronger with this modernization, the military system, school system, housing system, shops that would open in a certain time and close on a certain time. So this have led to a new culture to the city's concept, and maybe in other times we could talk about how a new culture could intervene in the conventional world of a city. The other and the next phase is the occupation and mandate era, where the occupations have set their standards. It's not only the urban or construction style, but the Western modernization follows a certain ideology, mentality different than the one that used to prevail in our Arab and Islamic world. And this mentality stems from ready-made models. That's why we see that the new modernized cities are alike, because they follow pre-planned plans, and this is in opposition to the old style of cities who had their own ideologies, mentalities, and we find this. And there's a number of Arab researchers who wrote about urban planning, and we find in a small number of those because it's like a duty to check what these Islamic researchers said about the construction during the Islamic time. So this is a comparison between two mentalities, one Oriental Islamic one and another is Western mentality that had imposed its own pattern or patterns on our urban planning. Actually, the second phase where the occupier, the mandators like the British or the French mandates have imposed a modernization, a type of modernization that are in line with its interests, with the missions that have started to arrive, and the commercial, economic interests. Then it imposed municipal regulations that would intervene in all livelihoods, and this is a reference that the whole concept of modernization in a city, whether in the first phase during the or the second phase during the mandate and the custody and occupation are due to or based on the desires of the rulers. We're now in the it's the time in where the planning of a city is something on the level of the higher system, and not according to the growth of in the number of population or the interest of the people. Also, there were resistance. We could feel there was resistance in this second phase of different levels. It wasn't because the people were rejecting, the indigenous people were rejecting the new style of urban planning and the new style of life. In addition to all this, it was a threat for the economic interest and a threat of big segments of people, especially artisans and craftsmen, because this Western competition has wiped out the styles of local industry and crafts, which led to a retreat in the labor market, the market of the city. And that's why we find that markets and neighborhoods in the old city were the theater for struggle, for resistance, which had taken in different ways of cultures to adhere to the traditions, customs, in addition to the real resistance, which means how to resist the occupier. And this, of course, was witnessed and was seen, whether in Syria or Palestine, where the arena for this, and there are many books that address the revolutions that erupted in the face of the occupier who imposed his interests, his typologies on people, especially people of the cities. The third phase that we can refer to in this context is about modernization of cities. It is the phase where which we can call the post-independence, so that is where many governments have witnessed, national governments in between brackets have witnessed, and these governments have faced inherited cases from the second phase, and has new conditions due to the population growth, because the intensive migration from the rural areas to the cities because of different aspects, and that's why we find that this, we're talking about the 40s and 50s until lately, we see that the cities have grown vastly, and some cities have moved from having 20,000 to 2 million or to 5 million people in our days, so managing or administering such huge cities has become very difficult, and that's why this is what we stemmed what we call poor neighborhoods and just marginalization, and slums, and that's why this reflects the exchange in the culture of a city. If we want to shed light on this regard, we know there is a transformation in this transformation from the conventional culture that used to dominate our cities in the 18th century, and then importing different types of the West, whether urban or in the daily behaviors or traditions, or even in the culture in a defined, like in schools and universities. We find nowadays that where the liberal ideas have flourished in the start of the 20th century, which was broadcasted by universities and institutes that would be reflected in the newspapers in calling for constitution, democracy, and this whole culture has diminished, and during the national ruling and post occupation, and this led to the creation of new categories and segments within the society. That's why we need to study, among other things, this phase and how the cultural types have changed from the first to the second and to the third phase. This is what I wanted to present to you in this brief speech. And at the end of my speech, I would like to thank again the Institute for Palestine Studies and to Birzeit University, and I wish you all success in this conference. And I thank you again for inviting me. And I hope we meet again in other opportunities. Thank you.